Many years ago, these hills supported a primitive man who, with the stone implements of that age, lived on the game which roamed under the blue skies. These same hills, when the Bantu first inhabited the area in the 16th century, began to have a new meaning. This one was named Umfolozi, due to the clicking sound that the old men are reputed to have made when climbing the steep hill. And this hill, Mpilo, indicating a place where people could live and escape the ravages of the malaria-carrying mosquito. A countryside as rich in game as Zulu lore. By the late 19th century, these hills were silent due to the indiscriminate slaughter by the early settlers, and had the old Natal government not proclaimed the Umfolozi Reserve, the white rhino would have been exterminated, for there were then only 20 in existence. Vaughan Kirby, Zululand's first game conservator, and Captain Potter, who subsequently succeeded him, fought against the slaughter campaigns of earlier years and saw the white rhino, which together with other game had been almost exterminated, increase in numbers through the years and our national heritage gradually restored. This was the beginning of the Umfolozi Reserve, where the duiker, amongst many others, was afforded the privileges of sanctuary. This sanctuary encouraged the kudu, which derives its name from the Hottentot language, and the Inyala, first discovered as little as a century ago on the northern shores of St. Lucia Lake, and even the warthog to become part of its happier years. Their fight for preservation continued, but in 1942, a terrible decision was taken in the name of Nagana, and with unabated fury, almost every animal was destroyed. The slaughter was long and terrible, and except for the call of the birds, the veldt was once again silent. A silence that only death is able to create. The white rhino, whose natural home is the Umfolozi Reserve, survived the ordeal thanks to Dr. Lang's earnest representations. But 300,000 head of game were destroyed in Zululand, and destroyed needlessly. For finally, insecticides came to the rescue, and the demand for the total abolition of Umfolozi died with the tsetse fly. But for the third time, the cost had been heavy, and with it, a silence only too well remembered. The fight for preservation saw a renewed era, and Umfolozi a new life, with game slowly and imperceptibly moving in through the corridor from the Umfolozi Game Reserve. A wildebeest, a South African darter high up in a tree, having returned to its previous haunts. An inyala, creeping stealthily through the corridor to a one-time peaceful Umfolozi. And the square-lipped rhino, once again enjoying its right to exist in its natural habitat. As we watch the white stork, the fight for preservation at Umfolozi and in Zululand is anything but complete. For even the reedbuck, together with others, has suffered. With a history of continual tragedy, which must never again be allowed to occur, it was decided, unwise, to have in one concentrated area, where it might be decimated by disease, one of the rarest animals in the world. In any case, with the possibility of the reallocation to the Bantu of Crown lands, it would mean that Umfolozi could in future years be overpopulated by grazing animals. When it became possible, therefore, with the help of Dr. Outhuren, to undertake the capture of the rare southern square-lipped rhino and distribute the animals to areas where they had formerly roamed, Operation Rhino was undertaken in the name of preservation. A square-lipped rhino, who has obviously been enjoying either a good sleep or a roll in a muddy pan, passes by quite unconcernedly as John Clark, the young game ranger who can almost talk to his captives, prepares a syringe by mixing together the various drugs to facilitate ease of capture by tranquilizing our proposed captive. The principal drug used is Themalon, which causes the rhino to be completely immobilized. A tranquilizer and other drugs used to alleviate apprehension and prevent struggling promote rapid acquiescence to captive conditions and induce the animals to take food and drink. A necessary additive, as loss of diet due to fear has many complications. The drug is dispensed with care, as the solution is dependent on the weight of the rhino to be caught. The liquid is placed in the syringe, and with seasoned experience, not a drop is spilt. The dispensing completed, John Clark screws the lid on a needle 2 inches in length. Peter Potter, Deputy Director for the Natal Parks Board, joins the party and glances over the syringe being used. It is especially designed for immediate activation on penetrating the rhino's hide. The syringe is placed in the barrel. A charge in the breech, and with a little adjustment to the bolt, the gas gun is loaded. With a little tidying up and the odd adjustment, the moment for Operation Rhino is at hand. Ian Player, the chief conservator of Zululand and mainly responsible for the success and development of Operation Rhino, handles the gun for inspection and, after a moment, as though deep in thought on the task ahead, takes his position in the open vehicle that will be driven over the bush and grass between trees and boulders in order to take our proposed captive by surprise. Ian Player, who will be firing the syringe, is followed by 2 horsemen, whose job it will be to keep in sight the injected rhino and so prevent the drugged animal from coming to any harm. Generally, the rhino for capture is chosen beforehand, so the search commences for its exact location and the best access for approach. Once determined, Ian Player is driven by John Clark first at a reasonable speed toward the rhino, but on nearing our target at speeds ever increasing in momentum, over thorn bush and overhanging branches that flick past with unpleasant savagery. For it is this element of surprise that at the moment of arrival allows the syringe to be fired at such short range. The truck slows down to a halt as hundreds of grasshoppers pass in front of the camera and the horsemen take up the trail as the automatic injection of the drugs is completed, and the rhino, a little bewildered, saunters off in the distance as gradually the drugs take their effect. The rhino immobilized, the riders approach our friend and then, satisfied, dismount and secure to a tree with the rope one of the rhino's legs. This is done not because the animal is likely to run away, but to prevent it from romping around in a drunken manner until the drugs have taken their final effect. John Clark with the tape measure and Ian Player with his record book set about their task in determining our friend's vital statistics. Every detail is examined and every measurement recorded. Ian Player looks up from his book and with an air of, well, that bit's done, moves over to the rhino to record its further measurements. The rhino hasn't a care in the world and by this time is snoozing happily in the land of Nod, no doubt dreaming that somebody is trying to disturb him. With the needle and syringe, penicillin is injected as a general precaution and as the flying syringe may not have struck a clean part of the hide. On arrival, the lorry is backed into position for our sleeping friend is to be transported to the boma. The crate is lowered whilst a temporary rest is taken and other arrangements are prepared for the rhino to enter the crate. After many experiments, a comparatively simple way was devised with the use of an antidote to the sleeping drug, but which drug does not prevent the tranquilizers from continuing their task, and a rope, which is placed over the head to assist in its direction to the crate. The antidote, already prepared, is given intravenously at the back of the ear. After about 60 seconds, our friend is rudely awakened and immediately responds. A tug on the rope, together with a little friendly persuasion, the white rhino quite happily enters what is to be his home until he arrives at his final destination, but after a short while of recuperation at the boma. The rope is removed and the first lap of his journey commences, and one may well ask, is his journey really necessary? The answer will always remain in the affirmative until further areas in Natal and South Africa can be made available for the grazing of the square-lipped rhino in substitution for other areas no longer available to the species. It's been a grueling journey from the days of the famous 20 that survived the early invasions when destruction of all wild animals was commonplace. In South Africa, a land where full development has barely begun, it is and should be our duty to secure indefinitely the retention of our reserves and even further areas for the protection of this rare animal which is our right to give and foster. For he that is deaf to the song of the birds and unmindful of that which nature can give to those who seek will have wasted his time upon the earth. Our arrival at the boma was not long delayed, and while the lorry was maneuvering into position, with the sun still shining in the late afternoon and our captive in a tranquilized peace, unaware of his new surroundings, Ian Player enjoys a quiet cigarette and tells the story of how Vaughan Kirby and Captain Potter in their day fought for the retention of the Umfolozi Game Reserve and the square-lipped rhino. Ian Player tells of how, with the assistance of keen game rangers through the years, Colonel Vincent rehabilitated the Umfolozi Reserve from the time of the Great Slaughter and, together with many others, enabled our reserves in Natal to take a place of pride in the continual struggle to preserve a heritage and which must be allowed to expand. With the door of the crate finally opened, Ian Player, the pioneer of Operation Rhino and responsible for its success, we find John Clark uses a little more friendly persuasion on welcoming our friend into the boma, where it will stay and become accustomed to human beings by his natural understanding. But with every rhino which leaves Umfolozi, we recall the words of the American Dr. Hubert Lang, who said that the square-lipped rhino is one of the most important animals left in the world, and it is the duty of all South Africans to see that the square-lipped rhino is well protected and looked after in years to follow.